We're at the end of the final sector of cobbles that the riders are going to face on stage 5 of this year's Tour de France. The riders are going to face 9 sectors of cobbles that are normally in the Paris-Roubaix. It's a stage that's going to have classic specialists licking their lips in anticipation and the GC favourites dreading what will be for most a day in hell.
And while we won't know who's going to win the Tour de France at the end of this stage, I can almost guarantee that there'll be some GC riders who certainly won't. The stage starts here in Ypres in Belgium, an emotive place for many people. And this was the scene, and this area was the scene of some of the fiercest fighting of World War I. As we just pass under the iconic Menin Gate. The peloton starts the stage in a northwesterly direction before then looping south, primarily for the whole day. Given the parcours are so flat and so exposed, with lots and lots of straight roads and a westerly prevailing wind, there could be the potential for the wind to cause some serious damage before the riders reach the pavé. But the reality on the ground is that as we hit the outskirts of Wayside, the race constantly starts to change direction. So often, in fact, there might not be that many opportunities due to lack of straight stretches of road for the wind to break up the bunch. After 58 kilometres, the race re-enters France and only 6 kilometres later comes into Roubaix. Now, admittedly not in the velodrome, but as we're here, we thought it'd be rude not to take it for a spin. "87 kilometres into stage 5, we hit this, the first of 9 sectors of pavé, and this is the fearsome Carrefour de l'Arbre. Unlike in Paris-Roubaix, the Tour de France hasn't classified the pavé sectors, but if this was classified, it would be 5 stars. You're thrown all over the place, really slippy.
The isolated cafe at the Carrefour de l'Arbre may be familiar to hardened cycling fans, but the cobbles themselves are going to be a shock, with the riders actually negotiating them in reverse compared to Paris-Roubaix. The first sector at Carrefour de l'Arbre is just a third as long as it normally is in Paris-Roubaix, so it's going to be more of a slap in the face than a concerted beating. Tensions are going to be running high at this point, with it being the first sector of cobbles and just 10k away from the first intermediate sprint.
Sector 7. This is Mons-en-Pévèle, another one that you'll recognise from Paris-Roubaix. Ridiculously difficult surface again. This is another 5-star section of cobbles. Now at this stage in the race, fatigue is going to really be setting in. The bunch is going to be splintering and splitting under the immense pressure at the head of the peloton. And riders that are getting dropped out the back, to even think about getting back on, have got to go faster than the riders in front. There's only so much of that you can sustain. So this is a crucial point in the race, and if the conditions are like this, it's going to be split to smithereens. Another one down. Sector 6 at Bercy is a 4-star in Paris-Roubaix, and you might recognise it from Paris-Roubaix, and it's 1.4 kilometres in length, and as you can see, it's got a very technical S-bend on it, which could prove quite interesting if the conditions are like this in a couple of days' time. If such a thing is possible, Sector 5 at Anchy is only categorised as 3 stars, 1.4 kilometres in length, but this is a point in the race, very much like in 2010, where the riders were on the pavé back then, where we'll see main GC contenders led by pavé specialists. Back then we saw Andy Schleck being led by none other than Fabian Cancellara, but Andy Schleck's not quite in the form he was back then. But Chris Froome, who rode Paris-Roubaix way back in 2008, has a couple of very, very able lieutenants in Bernie Eisel and Geraint Thomas. They're going to be travelling along these sections of pavé up to 50 kilometres an hour as the race really hots up for the last few sectors. Sector 4, Salzé-Rossière, 2.4 kilometres in length, and one of the hardest sectors of this stage. Classed as 4 stars, and as you can see, very uneven and difficult. But the tough thing about this, as I've said, is its length. At 2.4k, that equates to roughly 3.5 minutes of effort. And when you think that somebody of the calibre of Fabian Cancellara can put out around 500 watts over that period, and also considering the fact that power is absolute, so power to weight ratio on a flat surface over cobbles has no bearing at all. So at 20 kilograms lighter, somebody like Alberto Contador or Chris Froome really have their work cut out. The tyres I'm riding, out of interest, I've got a 27 on the front and a 25 on the rear. And I'm only running about 70 psi, which is about just over 4 bar, to help absorb the shock and dampen. It actually feels almost like you've got a little bit of suspension in the bike. What do you reckon, Tom? Think we deserve a burger later on? Sector 2. The penultimate sector, Guadagni-Zamage, is by far the hardest of this stage at a monstrous 3.7 kilometres in length. And regardless of the GC, this is where the stage is going to be fought out. We reached this point at only 140 kilometres, and when you think Paris-Roubaix is 260, it's almost half the distance, so there won't be quite the same level of fatigue in the riders' legs. So you could see some younger riders to the fore. Could it be a day that Peter Sagan hasn't quite excelled in the Cobbles Classics, but this could be a day for him, maybe even John Degenkolb. So here it is, the final sector from Hellersmans to Wallers. Only 1.6 kilometres in length. We shouldn't really see any attacks. And if there are any groups, they'll probably be working together to try and maintain the lead, as we only have 5 kilometres to go to the finish. We expect to see a sprint from a small group for the win, and then a lot of people nervously checking their watches to see who the day's biggest losers are going to be. Let's hope all the riders make it home in one piece, but given the terrain and the risk that will be taken to stay near the front, unfortunately that's doubtful. But one thing's for sure, this is going to be a Tour de France stage to remember, and God help them if it rains. It's going to be an awesome video, this. I'll stop swearing.
Parts of stage 1 in reverse direction. Good opportunity just to loosen the legs, opportunity to talk to the other riders in the team, and for the very first time wear the new fluoro